Welcome to LB United. I'm Josefa Salinas, a Los Angeles radio broadcaster for the last 30 years, a nonprofit owner, and also tremendous partner with Ronnie's House and LB United. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is grief. Grief comes in many forms, it has many faces. It's not always due to death. Sometimes the news on the television can cause us grief, especially recently. We all know too well that COVID-19 has fueled grief and loss, being separated from those that we love, from our friends, from our coworkers, has all amplified the concept of grief. I lost my mother last year as a result of COVID indirectly. She had COVID. She was in a rehabilitation center, got caught in there. I was going to bring her home on a Monday. That Friday, they shut it down. So she was caught in there. And then 2 months later, she had COVID. She recovered from the COVID, oddly enough, and then passed away because she kept getting pneumonia, which I know is a direct result of the COVID. So I know that it's very personal for me to discuss grief. And today we're going to talk about grief and what it means to navigate grief, the importance of finding your way despite the obstacles that COVID has set in our way, because so many of us feel isolated and alone. But before we get started, I want to note that I'll be giving resources throughout the conversation. Every once in a while, I'll stop down and give you a resource so that you can write it down or utilize it if you need it. But right now, let's get started. Joining up is David Leonard. He's the executive director of New Hope Grief Support Community. It's a nonprofit working to support families with grief in the city of Long Beach since 2003. David, good morning. It's so good to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good morning, and it is my pleasure to be here with you this morning. Thank you. And you know what, Josefa, I just want to pause and say, hey, I'm very sorry for the loss of your mother. I know that pain all too well, and my heart is with you. So I'm very sorry for that.
Yeah, it was very, very difficult to go through. And I know that my experience, which maybe or maybe not we'll talk about this morning, was a little bit different. I was a little more in an advantageous situation in the end for her, where I actually got to be in the room because she didn't have COVID. Everything that killed her was a result of COVID. I was there, masked up and gowned up and everything. And so she didn't have to die alone, but everybody didn't have that.
Yeah. I'm glad that you got to be there.
So newhopegrief.org is your website. Why don't you tell me, David, how you got involved with working with grieving and children and families and the whole concept of grieving?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always worked in philanthropy. I've always worked in the nonprofit sector. After college, I just kind of gravitated towards it. I have a heart for the community and for people and helping. And really kind of my journey into working with bereaved families and children started with my own grief, right? So as a young man, I was working, I had a job, I graduated college, I had a girlfriend, everything that the world told me I should be doing. But in the midst of that, I also was raising my mother, right? We had switched roles. My mom had battled with addiction, the latter half of her life. And unfortunately, that addiction it's powerful. If you've ever dealt with addiction or know people who are addicted, it's powerful stuff. And doesn't matter how bad you want people to get clean and sober, they got to want it for themselves.
Right.
My mom also had other mental health issues that exacerbated the whole scenario. So unfortunately, those choices and that lifestyle ended her life. And so I received that call as a young man, and that was hard. And again, I did everything the world told me I thought I should be doing. I had a job. I was building a life, and I was working with veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan at the time. And I was trying to identify needs that the VA or the Department of Defense was not meeting. And one of the needs that I did not account for was grief. It was survivor's guilt. This idea that it was my friend, my comrade was killed by a roadside bomb. And I was there, and I have all this guilt, and it was spouses coming in to our office sharing that my husband or my wife died in combat. And so again, I needed to find a resource. And so I done some homework and I came across New Hope and I met the founder of New Hope, Susan Beanie. We went to breakfast. We shared this beautiful idea that we had, how we could serve these heroes, right? And help
Right.
them and their families with their grief. And at the end of the breakfast, she says, "And what are you doing with all your grief?" And I'm like, "What grief? I ain't got no
Okay,
grief.
so I'm cool.
I'm good." Yeah.
Right.
But deep down, Josefa, I knew I was off, and I knew that it was impacting me. Um, so I got into a support group at New Hope. I joined a group, and that was in 2008. And so I joined a group. Long story short, I started volunteering for 5 years. The agency was on that show, if you recall, The Secret Millionaire on ABC.
Oh yeah.
Back in 2011, they were on the show. And then through that and a series of fortunate events, I was able to come on as their director of marketing and development. And I stayed on board. And then the founder, Susan, said, "Look, I think my tour of duty is up. And I believe that you are the one to kind of take over the reins." And so that's why I say, through a series of fortunate events, my pain from the loss of my mom has now become my passion. And so every day I get to wake up and bring hope and healing into the lives of bereaved children and families through connection and support here at New Hope. And that's what we're doing every day. And we've been doing it since 2003. So I'm just grateful that I get to wake up doing something that I care deeply and passionately about, and journey with people. See, many times we do things to and for people, but I believe there's a difference, that when you do it with people, it's a paradigm shift. And so everything we build and everything we do at New Hope, it's through a trauma-informed lens, but it's also to do it with people. And so I think that is some of the magic that's happening through what we do. And I just wrote briefly, New Hope, we do support groups for adults. We do family bereavement camps, family grief camps annually. And we do education and workshops and provide grief resources for families. So people listening, if you're in need, if you're in that place, please reach out.
So talk to me a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted people who've experienced the death of a loved one, the death of someone that they know, or for some people who haven't experienced the death of a loved one. Watching all of this death happen can cause tremendous anxiety and fear and an overwhelming sense of grief.
Yeah, you are not alone in what you just shared. That is a lot of people in the world experiencing that exact thing. And what we've been seeing with this pandemic and with COVID-19 is that individuals and family, right? We're grieving collectively as a community, and then we're grieving individually, and then we're grieving as family units. And with whether your loved one is, let's say, dying because of COVID-19 or the effects of COVID-19, and I want to remind people, there's still lots of people dying for other reasons, cancer and chronic illness, and you name it. And so I think so many times we're hyper-focused on COVID, but there's a lot of people dying for a lot of reasons still. But the pandemic and the COVID and the restrictions are making the ability to move forward in that grief much harder. There are no timelines on grief. Grief never ends. It changes and we change with it. But there are these markers that happen, right? Before COVID, someone died, and the community would show up, your tribe would show up to support you. And then, hey, we're going to work towards a memorial, and we're going to do a funeral, and we're going to have a graveside. And then there might be some religious things that are happening, going to a synagogue or a mass or prayers in your home. There's all these things that are bringing comfort and these markers that are happening. Well, in the pandemic, all that's come to a halt, right? And so this idea of your tribe being able to show up in traditional ways that we're accustomed to, the status quo has been broken. And so what we're seeing and what we're happening is so many families are putting funerals on hold and memorials and graveside burials. And that's making their grief much harder because they're trying to move forward and these markers have not happened. These things that they're longing to have happen cannot. And so families are holding on, and that's creating, like you were sharing, more anxiety, maybe more depression, more sadness. And those are all common effects of grief. I want to remind people that 1 out of 1 people are going to die. So that means 1 out of 1 people are going to grieve in their lifetime, right? So no one escapes this earth alive. And so everyone's going to experience grief. But during the pandemic, it seems to be exacerbated and more intense because we can't gather and have burials the way we're used to and have celebrations of life and do all these things. And we've seen many people in New Hope are coming to us asking, can you help? What can we do? What are things we can do? I personally have did a funeral for a friend of mine who lost his daughter during COVID. It was tragic and it was hard and it was horrible. And you could only have a few people there and all these things. So we're trying to find new ways of honoring and celebrating life while adhering to these guidelines set forth, right? By the county or state or whatever it may be to keep people safe. So it is hard, and we encourage people to still do the things you might normally do on a smaller scale, right? And so I think as people, friends, family, loved ones, there are still ways we can honor the life of those people. And it's not to say you still can't do something larger in the future when we can safely gather again. But one example is we might encourage people, you know, is there a place in your neighborhood, in your home, in your backyard that you could still, you know, plant a tree or plant a rose bush or plant something and maybe even put some of the ashes in the soil with that as a place marker, especially for children. We got to remember kids grieve too. And depending where they're at developmentally and how old they are, we need to be using language and making sure they understand what's happening, because all they know is, wow, my abuela or my grandma or my mom or dad went away to the hospital with this sickness. Maybe it was COVID, maybe it wasn't. And now they're gone. Maybe I got to see them on a screen. Maybe I didn't, right? And then what happens too for children is they get scared like, oh my gosh, is my mom going to die too? Or maybe it was as a sibling. Am I going to die? Is this going to happen to me? Right. So it's important that we're having conversations and checking in with kids regularly about their feelings and defining, you know, what is going on in the world and what is true and what is not true. Because I think just like a lot of subject matter with children, it's important that we are creating a framework and having that conversation with our kids about what's happening right now and what is COVID and what are the things that are happening and what can we do to celebrate the life and what are things we can do moving forward in the future when things open up again to celebrate the life. But the thing I always say is be sure to include kids. Don't discount them. Let them be involved in the planning. You know, if they got a favorite food, they want to write a letter to their loved one, they want to play a favorite song. You don't have to have a memorial to gather in your living room and put a picture up or have that favorite meal, put the music on, light some candles, and have a beautiful ceremony for that person.
Right. Well, you have joined, if you're listening, you are now listening to LB United. You can get more information at lbunited.org. One of the resources that we have, Long Beach Trauma Recovery Center, their phone number is 562-985-1366, and they provide no-cost support for victims of trauma, counseling services, telehealth. So please give them a call if you need them. We are talking with David Leonard, the Executive Director of New Hope Grief Support Community. So David, how do we go about supporting people that we care about? And for people who've experienced death recently and need support, what can they do?
That's a great question. It's a big question, but it's a good question. It's a big one, you know, and I want to just give some real simple ways and some practical things. You know, we are all living in isolation. I say that we suffer in isolation and begin to find healing in community. And that's hard to do right now, right? Because we can't gather. And so the way we're defining community looks different for all of us, right? But I'm a big fan of let's define how we're showing up, right? You know, a lot of times people say just show up. That's 90% of it, right? Just show up for people. And I think we just need to be creative in how we can show up for people. And for people who have experienced a loss or the death of someone they care about, I want to encourage you to get creative and think outside the box, right? So maybe you want to send flowers like you would at a funeral. Great, send flowers. But I'm a big fan that right now, a lot of families are struggling and income has changed, which is a loss, right? So, you know, there's all these secondary losses, loss of income, loss of a job, loss of relationship, loss of friends, even loss of and sense of community has changed for us. And so there's not just the death loss, there's all these secondary losses that people are experiencing and it's compounding it. So send flowers, great. But I think it's really important to know your friend or your family member and know what their likes are, know what their comforts are, what brings them comfort. Is it a certain food? Is it a dish? Is it a certain movie? I love sending Postmates gift cards I think that's a
Oh,
great way. You know,
right.
to be honest, we're getting calls right now from young fathers and mothers who've lost their spouse to COVID. Now they're raising young children, and maybe they didn't used to make the meals. Maybe that was mom's job. So their roles are shifting, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, how am I going to feed my kids every day? I don't even know how to cook or turn on the stove." Send them a Postmates gift card, right? Let them get online and order whatever it is they need, their favorite food, their favorite meal, to their home, right? Maybe you're going to the grocery store and like, you know what? Let me pick up the phone or shoot a quick text and say, hey, I'm headed to the store. You need a gallon of milk. You need some eggs. What is it you need? Like, let me bring that to you. You don't even have to open the door. I'm just going to drop it off on your
Right.
porch and let you know that it's there. Um, I heard another creative way I want to share. There was this young musician, and we were having a great conversation. She reached out. She's like, I really just want to help grieving people right now. And she's like, I'm a musician. I'm not on tour right now, but I have my gift of music, and I want to know singer-songwriter. I said, how great would it be if people could hire you to go play at people's homes and say you're there on behalf of their loved one and say, look, we couldn't have a funeral, we couldn't gather, but
Right.
here's a love note, and I want to bring the music to you. So all the musicians listening, like, if that's your gift, like, go bless a household and bring some songs, play Lean On Me, play like whatever their favorite song of their loved one was in their front yard and give a little concert. And let people maybe, empower you and hire you to go use your gifts. I thought that was a really cool way to bring that. And here you are opening the front door and there's this musician playing your mom or dad's favorite song or wedding
Right.
song or anniversary song. And that fills my heart. So again, I want to encourage creativity during this time to be thinking, and it can be as simple as love notes, old school snail mail, break out a pen and paper, put some love into it, and send it off, snail mail to your friends. Because here's what I think: being isolated and alone, people think no one can understand what I'm going through, right? I'm the only person experiencing this, and how can I begin to make sense of all of this and what's happening? And I think when people just take the time to reach out, a lot of times, Josefa, we're scared to talk about grief. We don't want to mention it because we think we're going to hurt their feelings or make them cry or bring them to a place that we can't help them get out of.
Mhm.
But the reality is people are longing to talk about the life of their loved one and to talk about their grief. And so I encourage people all the time, don't be afraid to say, hey, how's your grief today? How you doing with your grief? How's that been going for you? How have you been doing since the death of, and say their name. We're so afraid to say their name. How you been doing since the death of Sandy or Robert or whoever? Say their name and don't be afraid to press into that space. And a lot of times people are going to be like, wow, thank you for saying their name. Thank you for asking. And thank you for being willing to listen and show up. And you don't need to be a grief expert. You really don't. You just need to listen. Just be willing to listen. Don't give advice, and don't say things like, oh, they're in a better place, or oh, there's a reason for. No, they don't want to hear any of that. Just be a good listener and show up for them. And every now and then find ways to check in, bring food, write a letter, send balloons, send a musician, whatever you can do to bring a little bit of joy into their day. We always say at New Hope, it hasn't been a good grief support group if there hasn't been laughter and tears, right, in the same room, in the same space. And I think people need to know that, yeah, we're in hard times. We really are. There's a lot of adversity, but I think it's this balance of how can we celebrate, and how can we also have time of tears and sadness, and they can be in the same space, in the same room at the same time, and that's okay. And we tell grieving people this, Josefa, you're not going crazy. Everything you feel is normal. All those feelings you're having are absolutely normal part of grief. And the last thing is you have permission to grieve. No matter what the world is telling you, your friends are telling you, oh, you should be over it by now. Oh, why are you still crying? Why are you crying? Don't listen to them. Like,
Right.
this is your journey. This is your grief. No two people's grief journey is the same. They're as unique as a thumbprint. So hear me out. You have permission to grieve. And if people tell you otherwise, they can call me and I'll let them know for you. that David said, look, this is my journey, and
Right.
I have permission to do what I need to do in my journey of grief. So,
Well, another resource that we have for everyone, the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, they offer a lot of free resources. Their phone number, 800-854-7771. So David, newhopegrief.org is your website. This is being brought to you by lbunited.org. Um, when we don't take time to grieve and go through the process after the loss, how does that affect people? When you like just brush it off and like, yeah, 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 I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, and just suck it up and keep going because you feel like that's what you have to do. And then, one day it's a cartoon on TV that just causes you to just break down and you're like, what the heck is wrong with me?
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that, like sucking it up and not grieving, not allowing yourself to grieve, what that can cause and how much harm that can cause to the person.
Yeah, that's a good one. We get calls like that all the time. Usually it's family members calling us on behalf of family members saying, I'm concerned about my cousin. His wife died a year ago and he has 2 kids and he's just stoic or he's not crying. I don't ever see emotion. He's just going to work. Well, I want to remind people, like I just said a moment ago, that no two grief journeys are the same, right? And we should never compare grief. We should never compare our grief to someone else's grief because we don't know. There's different types of grievers, instrumental grievers, intuitive grievers. There's tons. And so I think it's important to remember, just because someone outwardly is not expressing grief does not mean they are not grieving, because we're not with them 24/7, right? And I'm actually encouraged if they break down and cry, if they see a cartoon, or they smell cookies that reminds them of their mom used to make those bomb cookies, or the grocery, there's smells and things we see that trigger our grief, right? Now, I do want to say though, again, there's no timeline on grief. There's it's a continuum. And as it changes, we're changing with it. Now, we can definitely be making choices. I think the important thing is, how are we responding to our grief, right? Are we allowing it to be all consuming? And are we not? We need to allow ourselves, as the emotions arise and as the feelings come, that we allow ourselves to experience those. I say all the time, you can't go around grief. You can't go under grief. You have to go through grief. You have to experience all the feelings and all the things that is bringing with it. And the thing about it is, Josefa, is that when we journey with it, that we are changing as humans and as people, right? It's shaping our worldview. It's shaping our experience. It's shaping our relationships with others in our life. And as we do that, we're becoming different people, and that's okay. And so I just want to encourage folks that are listening that if you have loved ones are grieving, or you're in the same household right now because we're quarantined and you've lost someone, don't compare yourself in your journey to your brother, to your cousin, your grandma, whoever it is, because they're grieving in their own way, right? And I think, again, I want to encourage you, don't be afraid to talk to them about their grief. So often we isolate, even being in the same home. We can be in separate rooms. We can and not talk about what's going on. And I want to encourage people to be having conversations about how you're feeling and doing check-ins and having family time to talk about, hey, how's everyone doing this week? It's been a week, it's been a month, it's been a year since so-and-so died. How's everybody doing? This is where I'm at. Where are you at? And being okay. But the important thing is that we're talking about it and we're bringing it out. And like me, I called myself a high functioning griever, right? I was going to work, I was exercising, I was doing everything, but I knew deep down I was off, and thankfully Sue Beanie, the founder, was wise enough to say, hey, what are you doing with all your grief? And I know it's inside of you, but how's it doing? How's it manifesting itself? And I'm so grateful that she did that. And so I think it's important that be encouraged that you might be the one who needs to be the one to ask, how's your grief doing? Because that just might be the thing people need to hear, because maybe they're thinking, man, nobody cares about me. Everyone's telling me, oh, you're not grieving right, or well, has anyone, maybe you're the one who needs to take the time to ask the right question about how is your grief? How are you? How have you been since so-and-so died? Not quick to cast judgment, but to create a safe space that's inclusive, to have that conversation. So.
Very good. Well, the city of Long Beach has some really great programs going on right now. If you're a Black resident of the city of Long Beach, there's a program that is available under the CARES Act funding that'll provide you with 7 60-minute sessions to access these services, which are limited in time. The city has created a form for you to fill out, which is included, or you can access the resources at lbunited.org.
Mm.
So David, let's quickly, I got a couple real quick questions to ask you before you get out of here. Do people have to have insurance to get support from you or other groups about grieving? Like if I don't have insurance, am I just out of luck?
No, you are not out of luck, Josefa. So New Hope is a nonprofit organization. We turn nobody away. So we want to encourage you to give us a call and reach out. In our 17 years of existence, we have never turned anyone away. We do not accept insurance. We don't take Medi-Cal, Medicaid. We're a nonprofit organization. We receive grants and donors and resources that way. So we make sure that we can get people the support they need. And I want to know, you've listed some great resources throughout our time together. I want to encourage people, look, press into community and press into the resources. Don't let stigma or anything. Reach out. There's no shame in needing help, and these resources are there for you. So I just want to encourage you, if you're listening, now's the time. Don't wait. Like reach out, get the help you need, get the support you need, and make the call or get online and fill out the forms.
Well, it has been such a joy talking with you today, and it kind of inspired me to maybe come and get in on one of these grief like group sessions or
We'd love
something.
to have
I
you.
know I've held on to a lot of grief. My father was my rock, and he passed 3 years ago. Then my mom dying. So it's important to admit that you still feel some of that inside, and that it's okay that months later, a year later, 2 years later, it, especially if it's a parent that you've lost, it always stays with you. And that there's all kinds of grief. It's not just grief from death. There's grief from loss of income, loss of contact with other people, loss of community. There's so many ways, loss of our belief in what the democracy is in this country. I mean, to see that shattered a couple of weeks ago, I saw people crying watching the news.
Absolutely.
So to access free and low-cost mental health services, you can log on to lbunited.org, or if you need bereavement support, grief support, no matter what kind of grief you are experiencing, please give David a call here, newhopegrief.org, newhopegrief.org. David, thank you so much for what you do, for your commitment to this. I hope that we have many, many, many conversations moving forward. And thank you so much for being with me.
Yeah, Josefa, thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to be here. And and I hope that this is the first of many and that we can catalyze these conversations because they're needed in our communities. And we need to make sure that people are getting connected to the resources they need to live healthy and flourishing lives. So thank you.
This whole conversation about grief has been brought to you by Ronnie's House, a community-based organization dedicated to bridging the gap in equity. Thank you so much for being with us, and definitely we'll be back with more.